distinguished lecture series. We are honored to have with us the distinguished expert, Professor V.V. Krishna. Today's lecture highlights the historical and sociological dimensions of scientists in Indian laboratories, bridging the colonial and post-colonial era. It also covers socio-historical account of S&T studies, including science and policy research in India. So, to begin the formal proceedings, I would like to invite our director, Dr. Geeta Vani Rayasam, to kindly welcome our esteemed speaker, Professor V.V. Krishna, with a plant. Thank you, ma'am. I now invite Dr. Parmanand Burman to welcome our director, Dr. Rayasam. Thank you, sir. I request Dr. Geeta Vani Rayasam to deliver a brief welcome address.
Good afternoon and warm welcome to Professor Krishna. And I think, like I was just mentioning, every month we try to have one distinguished speaker from working in an area related to what we are doing at NISPR. So I was just discussing with him, perhaps he knows more about NISTADs than me. So I think he will mention perhaps in his address how his association with NISTADs. So now, as you are aware, two institutes have combined together, the policy and the communication. It's called as National Institute of Science Communication and Policy Research. So now I think we are focused on both communication and policy, and we are also trying to integrate both the verticals, as you say. So how we can work together and leverage one over the other. And I think again, thanks for taking out your time and being with us, and we look forward to the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It is my privilege to introduce our speaker for today. Professor Venni V. Krishna is a professional fellow at the University of New South Wales and honorary professor at the University of Sydney. Additionally, he is a fellow of the Royal Society of New South Wales. With over 30 years of experience, his work spans science and technology policy, innovation studies, and the sociology and history of science across institutions in India, Australia, Singapore, China, and Canada. He previously led the Sociology of Science group at CSIR-NIScPR and served for over 2 decades as professor and chair at the Center for Studies in Science Policy, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has authored over 40 papers and 5 books, including Universities in the National Innovation System, Asia. Professor Krishna is editor-in-chief of Science, Technology and Society and has contributed to global policy through roles with UNESCO, OECD, ILO, and the European Research Council. With this, it is my honor to invite Professor Krishna to deliver his lecture. Sir, the stage is yours.
You can go there or you can speak.
I think
Okay.
Yeah. It doesn't go back? Oh, yeah. Okay, good afternoon. At the outset, let me express my sense of gratitude to the director, NISPR. And I'm really delighted to come back to the place where I began my career. And I can see many of our colleagues who are here, and some of them, most of them have retired actually, but some of them are still here. So I'm really delighted to come back to a home institution, in fact. And I'm really grateful to Dr. Ras to invite me here. Today, what I'm going to speak is about the book which I did publish recently on Indian science community, historical and sociological studies. This book has about 11 chapters, and these 11 chapters, which are both historical and sociological, and actually, the historical chapters are written when I was in NIStats. So further developed when I went to JNU, and there are a number of other sociological chapters are there. I'm also editor-in-chief of Science, Technology, and Society. And I'm really glad also to tell you that when we were here in NIStats, this journal was launched as a part of the Indo-French cooperation in science and technology, and where we had a long project with France at CNRS as well as the IRD, Institute for Research and Development, on scientific communities. So that's where I got into this whole research into scientific communities. So even now, its impact factor is 2.2 or 2.3, which is not bad for a science policy journal, but it's an international journal. So any of you who have a good, you think good articles, you can send it to this thing. So in these chapters, there are 11 chapters are there. And what I'm going to do is spend a little bit more time on the emergence of Indian science community, historical and sociological, 1876 to 1940s, because it is a much more interesting chapter, which gives a kind of a foundation to the whole notion of what is Indian science community. Of course, there are other chapters on CSIR, on science and technology policy cultures, Gandhi and subaltern science, science activism in India, and various things. First of all, the whole definition of Indian science community. Indian science community is taken as a very broad definition. It is not just the buildings and the money which gives you a kind of a notion of science community. It is the intellectual culture, the journal, the research groups, the advancement of science gives you scientific community. And science also is not a kind of a very pure science one is dealing with. Science, we are also dealing with technology and innovation. So we have taken a very broad definition of science community in India. So that's why you will find from science activism to Gandhi, Nehru, other debates which are there, you will find in this thing. So in the first chapter is what gives kind of a synopsis of the first chapter is that there's a lot of history of science writings are there. There are many Western historians are there who have projected India or Asia in terms of the world science. So if you look into ancient, medieval, and the modern science and the various Western historians, there's a whole lot of arrogance is there within the Western historians of science who think that science came to non-Western cultures as a part of the Western scientific revolution, which is true to some extent because of the Copernicus revolution, because of the Galileo and many of the other things are there. But it doesn't mean that non-Western societies like Asia or the dark spaces or the empty spaces. So if you look into George Basala, who wrote a classic article, that was the kind of this thing, that much of the science in the non-Western cultures, whether Asia, Latin America, or Africa, has come as a part of the Western. He gives about three models of the diffusion of the science and technology, which this particular chapter sort of critically evaluates that kind of a perspective, saying that modern science is not alien to science in India. The epistemological roots of modern science can be traced to the ancient medieval period. The classic example is P.C. Ray, Hindu Chemistry. He wrote 2 volumes in 1907 and 1909. P.C. Ray, who is the father of Indian chemistry, who was at the Presidency College, who was the vice president of the Edinburgh Chemical Society, comes back to India, starts chemistry start doing research during the colonial period. He wrote the two books, The Prime of His Career as a Scientist. The purpose of writing the history of Hindu chemistry was to show that the epistemological roots of chemistry, Rasayanik Shastra, has gone down into the medieval and the modern and to the ancient period. He translates, he himself is a fantastic Sanskrit scholar, Rasendra Chintamani and Rasa Prakasa Sudhakara. The 12th century texts, the 13th century texts he translates. He shows that India is not alien to chemistry. So the roots of modern science in chemistry can be traced to the ancient and the medieval period. Similar is the kind of the developments in astronomy, in mathematics, in logic, and various things. So that is the purpose of this first chapter in this, not to glorify the past. This is a very dangerous trend. We should not glorify the past, So give respect to the extent that our ancient period has demonstrated to the world that India is not an empty space, whether it is PC Ray, whether it is JC Bose, Vinay Sarkar. There's a whole lot of people are there who have written fantastic books to show that India has contributed immensely to the world science when there were dark ages in Europe during the medieval period. So that is the purpose of the first chapter. The second chapter in the book is on the emergence of Indian science community, 1876 to 1940s. Why 1876? Because 1876 is the period when one of the first institutions by Mahendranath Sarkar has come out, Indian Association of Cultivation of Science, where C.V. Raman has got the Nobel Prize in 1930s. The Asiatic Society, Botanic Surveys, East India Company, Victorian government, between 1857 and there is nothing to take away from the British period's contribution that the modern science was institutionalized in India. Major technology projects, whether it is railways, transportation, scientific surveys, has come here. But much of the technology and much of the science and technology was supported by the British only to the extent that it could aid their industrial revolution, where they could drain up the resources. So that is the reason why they created 12 scientific surveys, whether it is botanic survey, geological survey. Even in geological survey, they will not work on iron ore, but they will do on coal, because coal was important at that particular point of time. So during the colonial period, a lot of technology and a lot of science has come. Science was institutionalized, but not professionalized. When we say science was professionalized, the journals were there, the local people are there, the local universities are there, the local institutions like these are there, where you're contributing to the advancement of science. So that was not the very much. So in this particular chapter, one is trying to probe from this perspective that how did Indian scientific community emerge during the colonial period? That is the kind of. So from 19th century colonial science operating at its peak in India, power passed from the East India Company to the Victorian government. There were 11 science enterprises were there. 3 universities, major projects, railways, telegraphy, 11 major scientific surveys. So what were the objective structure of organization? In terms of the whole objectives, you will find that it was the economic exploitation to aid the British industrialization and oriented project, the scientific surveys, data gathering activity, and applied research. It was not scientific professionalism. So what they were doing, the lot of data gathering activity they were doing as a part of the 11 scientific surveys. For the synthesis, it used to be sent to the Britain. So there was a kind of a center-periphery relationship between the metropolis Britain and the periphery India. The social organization, in terms of the social organization, there was a lot of discrimination, racial discrimination, mostly applied research institutionalized science, but not support professionalization. There was the gatekeeping activity. Now this is the table from the PC Ray's 1920s when he was addressing the Indian Science Congress. And among the 11 scientific surveys, you will find 95 Europeans and 18 Indians. In these, they were given half the salary with the same qualifications. So you can find the whole racial discrimination at that particular point of time. For example, Dwarannath Tagore, father of Rabindranath Tagore, was not given entry into Asiatic Society of Bengal for more than 55 years. So that was the kind of the situation which was prevailing. For instance, the Medlicott, who was the head of the Geological Survey of India, a typical quote, Indians are incapable of any original work in natural science. He wanted to wait till the scientific chord among the natives was touched. So this was the kind of the arrogance of the whole British Raj, which was there. There's no point in going into details because a lot of this stuff is there in the historical writings. So the first degree of science was established after the struggle in 1898 at the Calcutta University. The scientific surveys created professional technicians. Towards the end of 19th century, several Indian scientists and engineering returned from UK and Europe found themselves frustrated and they wanted to develop support structures as late as the late 19th century. So there was a breakaway from the colonial science. The colonial scientific enterprises which are there, which were doing institutionalized science but not professionalized. There are a lot of technology, big technology projects were there. For instance, 11,000 miles of telegraphy was established between 1857 and 1861. Note that period is we call it first war of independence in 1857. They call it mutiny, you see. So 11,000 miles of telegraphy was not for the development of the country, but to aid their own kind of the political base in India. So between 1876 and 1914, you find a lot of support structures toward creating a base in national science. They themselves called it national science. It is not my definition. They did a lot of popularization of science, translation, science communication, what this institute is also doing. Specialized science institutions, universities were created. Science professional associations have come into being. So during the colonial period, if you ask a question, if you ask a sociological question, what were the three categories of people who were involved in the colonial science? The first was the gatekeepers like Medlicott and Sir Thomas Holland, who wanted to they did the gatekeeping activity that the science institutionalized will only go to a certain extent, but it will not further develop into further professionalization or advancement of science institutions or creating research in the universities. The second were the soldiers. People like William O'Shaughnessy and William Pole, who creates 11,000 miles of telegraphy, very good technologies, but once the task is over, they go back to Britain. See, they were typical soldiers who finished their tasks, who went back. In the third category, you will find the supporters like P.C. Ray, J.C. Bose, Mahendralal Sarkar, David Harre. Even some Britishers were there. David Harre was a watchmaker who comes to India, Calcutta, who founds the President's Hindu College, which later on becomes the Presidency College. Father Lafont, who created the St. Xavier Institute. Samuelson, who is one of the founders of the Indian Science Congress in 1914. So there were hundreds of people were there in the natives and the supporters. This is the third category of the people who are important for the Indian science community during the colonial period. So there were a whole lot of institutions were there. Indian Association of Cultivation of Science by Mahendralal Sarkar. First degree in science came in after Sarkar and many of the people were fighting against the British Education Service in 1898. C.V. Raman. Now, C.V. Raman goes to Calcutta as a finance officer in the British government. He passes through Indian Association of Cultivation of Science every day. He is a born scientist. So one day he goes and says that I want to do research in physics as a part-time. So he joins Indian Association Cultivation of Science as a part-time scientist, who later on becomes a full-time in 1907. He resigns from the government. 1930s, he was able to win the Nobel Prize in physics. So what did the first institution, Indian Association of Cultivation of Science, had the goal? It said, I quote, we should endeavor to carry on the work with our own efforts unaided by the government. I want it to be entirely under the management and control. I want it to be solely native and purely national. So the concept of national science, creating within the colonial science, was one of the most important objectives for that period. J.C. Bose, 1917, Bose Research Institute was created, St. Xavier College, which had one of the largest astronomical surveys at St. Xavier's, was institutionalized in 1960s and 70s. J.R.D. Tata created the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore in 1907. University College of Science and Technology came out with 4 million rupees of donations, created shares. At that particular time, 1917, 4 million rupees is a lot of money. 1857, 1918, 9 universities, 45 affiliated colleges. They were the major contribution by the Indians with the Indian money outside the colonial enterprises. You see, that is the kind of the data we were able to get in terms of the whole thing. You had people like, there were princely states like Kalabavan, which later on becomes the MS University of Baroda. Similarly, in Kerala, they had people. So 1914 Indian Science Congress Association was there. So if you see between 1876 and 1930s, the whole lot of institutions were created, which has given a kind of a support structure for the science and technology, for basic research, for professionalization of science, for advancement of knowledge. He's the Mahendralal Tarkar, the founder of the Indian Association of Cultivation of Science. This is the St. Xavier College. J.C. Bose, who worked on microwaves as well as plant physiology. Actually, he patented microwaves in 1896, but he could not renew the patent. And so the patent lapsed. After a few years, Marconi came out with microwaves. So that was the great scientist, J.C. Bose. This is P.C. Ray, father of Indian chemistry. Today, we talk about university-industry relations as a kind of a big buzzword. But he's the father of university-industry relations, who created Indian Bengal Chemicals and the Pharmaceuticals Limited, one of the largest factories at that particular point of time, which had direct relationship with the Presidency College. So the whole, if you want to know about what is the origins of university-industry relationships, it is P.C. Ray, and second is Bhatnagar. When he comes to find the CSIR, he already creates at Lahore, the chemistry department, the whole lot of university-industry relations, because he was working on oil, on colloids, and a lot of money he got because of the work for the industry. So he created those things. C.V. Raman, who's later on, who comes in conflict with M.N. Saha. M.N. Saha was in Allahabad University, who created one of the largest, most eminent ionospheric schools. But he's a Bengali. He wants to go back to Calcutta. When he goes to Calcutta, comes in conflict with Raman. Raman goes back to Bangalore to create, to become a director of Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Then later on, he creates a Raman Research Institute. So these are the other side of the politics of science. Jamshedji Tata, who funded the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, at that particular point of time, you will find Indian Association of Cultivation of Science started the translation and the science communication between during the 1875 and 1896. You will find 2,124 publications from all the regions of the country, where languages was very important, because much of the modern science was in English. It was to be translated into local languages. So science communication in the science languages was a very important activity of the Indian Association of Cultivation of Science and similar other institutions at that particular point. This is the table of the Indian Science Congress Association. Now there's a lot of criticism that the Science Congress has become a mela, and for the time past, people go there and things like that. But at that particular point, till about 1970s, I think, it was a very eminent institution. And the Indian Science Congress, there were people like P.C. Ray, Bose, and Raman, and many of those people were involved in it. It was used as a kind of a platform where professionalization of science was there, because a lot of 30 or 35 scientific societies and the journals were created and which came out from the members of the Science Association. So this is the graph of the growth. A lot of details you will find in the book. So you can ask the director to order for at least 4 or 5 books for the library so that people can borrow and read. So these are the journals which are produced between 1820 and 1950. So by 1930, you will find within the colonial context, at one level, there was a dominant colonial scientific enterprises like the Geological Survey of India, where racial discrimination and where much of it was a kind of a European orientation was there. The other side was there, the specialist groups who were funding from the local, their own money, Indian money, from the princely states and from the landlords. The whole physics, chemistry, maths, astronomy, plant physiology, these are the kind of the groups which came up during those periods. Advancing science from Indian institutions outside colonial science enterprises was one of the major activity. This is Indian School of Chemistry. In the book, you will find a lot of data on the publication of the papers where something like Indian School of Chemistry came up, Prafulla Ray, Indian School of Physics led by M.N. Saha and C.V. Raman during the period 1920s and 30s. This is Ramanujan. Ramanujan was a very statistically a deviant case who was a fortress clerk who was a born mathematician who works on number theory, invited by Cambridge, Thomas Hardy, dies at the age of very early in the 30s. So he's a kind of a, but he has contributed immensely even till today. The whole there's the whole field of mathematics which is following number theories. So Indian Fellows of the Royal Society, if you find by 1944 there were 10 Fellows of the Royal Society. Nothing to be mistaken by as a part of the British this thing, because there were many scientists like P.C. Ray, J.C. Bose who were trained in the British metropolis, but when they come back to India, they find totally stifled. So they go to the universities, they go become part of this Indian science community to develop institutions and things like that. So what happens by the 1930s is something of an Indian science community is created outside the colonial science enterprises. So this is the kind of the thesis which is a critique of the historians who work on the colonial science. For them, till 1947 is the colonial science. But what I'm trying to say in this particular chapter is within the colonial context, there's something called Indian science community has emerged from the late 19th century, and the whole data is there. Whether it is publications, whether their activities, what kind of research they did, how did this advanced science, you will find a lot of the stuff over here. So that is the second chapter in this book. The third chapter is on the early history of CSIR, 1934 to 1947. This chapter is basically, if you see CSIR, Indian CSIR was modeled on the British DSIR model, Department of Scientific Industrial Research, created during the First World War between 1914 and 1918. The British model is given to Australia in 1926, given to New Zealand in 1926, given to Canada in 1920s. But when it comes to non-Western societies, India, it comes only in 1942. So what I do in this book is what is the struggle between the British enterprises, administration, and Indians when they wanted to create a model. See, the DSIR, CSIR model in this, which is relevant to India, industrial research. So there's a whole kind of the story you will find, the origin of the whole thing and the role of S.S. Bhatnagar, Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar in as early as something like 1934, I think. Modliar and Bhatnagar led to the wartime demands in 1942 to create this thing. But even before that, there was Indian Industrial Research Bureau department was created in 1934, which is the origins of this thing. There's a book I published on SS Bhatnagar and Science, Technology and Development in 1990s. So the lot of the story is there and must be, I don't know whether it is there in your library or not. There's a lot, all of Bhatnagar's paper on science, technology, development, you will find with a very extended introduction, which gives the whole picture. But in this particular chapter, the whole struggle where India has waged in terms of creating what we have now is the Council of Scientific Industrial Research, and Bhatnagar becoming the first Director General is there in this. Because Bhatnagar is a very powerful person in the 1940s and the 50s, you see, who was able to create something like 18 to 20 labs within a very short period between 1940 after independence and this thing. So he had a very close nexus with the Nehru, who had, there were very few scientists like Homi Bhatnagar and Homi Baba and others, Vikram Sarabhai later on. Some of those people who had very close contact with the politics, who were able to create, for instance, Bhatnagar just went to the Mysore Maharaja and said that I want a building to create a food research lab. That's why you have the Mysore Food Technological Research Institute. So in this book, you will find a lot of those stories which are there, and a lot of something is there in the third chapter in this particular book. Number 4 chapter is on the post-war organization of science and science, the role of the National Planning Committee, and the A.V. Hill report. In this particular chapter, when the war is over, India is about to sort of start after independence. The main question was, what should be the model of science organization in the independent India? You see? So basically, you have two models. One is the A.V. Hill report of 1945. A.V. Hill, Scientific Secretary of the Royal Society, was invited by Nehru in 1943 and the Indian this thing to give a report on how India should organize its science and technology for the development in the post-war organization and the post-independence period. So he gave a report in 1945. Everyone should read it. Science and technology in India. So the present model of science and technology controlled by the government is the model which is given by A.V. Hill. You see, there was a second model. So in the post-war organization, in this particular book, we give two models. One is the A.V. Hill report, which is one model. The other is the M.N. Saha's model. M.N. Saha's model comes out because of the deliberations in the National Planning Committee, where Bose was the president, and later on they wanted to make Saha as the president of the National Planning Committee, which is the present day NITI, earlier Planning Commission. And Saha says, no, Nehru should be the president of the National Planning Committee. That was very important in 1930s because a lot of debates on the India science and development started from the 1930s, because 1931, after the Lahore Congress, the total independence call was given by Gandhi, you see. So after that, it was very clear that India is going to achieve independence one day or other. So they wanted to sort of deliberate on this. So almost for about 20 years, they went on. So in these deliberations, Saha gave his own model of Science Research Council. So A.V. Hill report, which comes in 1945, then you have the other model, which is the Saha's model. Saha wanted to give much more autonomy to the universities. He wanted to create a kind of a system where there's autonomy is there, which is controlled by the government. But unfortunately, what happens is that Nehru becomes the prime minister after independence, who becomes very powerful. And there are very powerful people like Bhatnagar and Homi Baba and J.C. Ghosh, Man Lobis, and D.S. Kothari, who was then the defense chief, who becomes the defense chief. These are the people who, with Nehru, will accept the A.V. Hill model. So, Saha, what happens is, Saha is also a top-rated physicist. There's a journal called Science and Culture. From 1938 to 1954, he edited this journal, The Science and Culture. So the most illuminating debate on Indian science policy can be found in the pages of Science and Culture. You will find all the debates. Because Saha was very important, because Saha did not agree with Nehru to completely monopolize science under the government. So he went to the extent, and then, for instance, in the nuclear science and nuclear technology, also he said that it should be developed in the universities. You see, which was not acceptable to Homi Bhabha. So Homi Bhabha was so powerful that the headquarters of atomic energy, he has taken it to Bombay. You see, these are the kind of the politics which were existing at that particular point of time. But none of the politics has interfered into the development of the science in India from the nationalist perspective. So he opposed Nehru, contested against Nehru in the Congress party in Calcutta, sat in the parliament against the government, but supported Nehru on the larger questions of science and development. So that's the beauty you will find in the debates in that particular period of time. So when we say that there was an alliance between science and politics created by Nehru, so you will find there are people like Bhatnagar, who was so powerful, who was the chief of CSIR, secretary to the government of India. The whole concept of secretary to the government of India comes out during that period, where started by Bhatnagar and Homi Bhabha, not by Homi Bhabha, but basically Bhatnagar, who in collaboration with A.V. Hill said that all heads of the science agencies should be given the position equivalent to the secretary to the government, because they are equivalent to the civil services. So the people like Homi Bhabha, J.C. Ghosh, Mahan Logis, who was at the planning commission, who wrote the second plan, D.S. Kothari, who was the head of it. So when you accept a thesis that there is an alliance between science and politics, there has to be people outside the alliance. M.N. Saha was outside. C.V. Raman was outside. C.V. Raman was given a lot of respect, but no power in the government. Koshambi, who was in the atomic energy. Visvesvaraya. There were several others were there. So what I'm trying to say is there's a close alliance between science and politics developed during the period by Nehru, and it had many positive aspects to it. For instance, he could develop so many labs just because of their alliance with the. So the fourth chapter basically is dealing with what happened immediately after independence till about 10 or 15 or 20 years. The kind of the debates, the kind of the model of science organization which happened and how it came about. So that is the picture you will find in the chapter 4. The chapter 5 is on the science and technology policy culture, 4 phases of S&T development. So in this particular chapter, one is trying to give what kind of policy cultures have developed in India after independence. We start from 1947 to 1970s. We come down to the post-1914 era, the present regime, which is there. And we will include mission orientation in science and innovation, the present government. So we are used 2 concepts here. One is the policy for science, which is basically during the Nehruvian period up to the 60s. You will find the first science and technology plan in India was issued only in 1973, 1974. Till 1974, there was no science and technology plan. You see, there was a chapter within the planning commission in the 5-year plans, but much of the development of the science and technology developed because of the alliance, because of the people who were there. Bhatnagar in industrial research, Homi Bhabha in atomic energy, D.S. Kothari in the defense research. There's a whole lot of later on people, Vikram Sarabhai came into the space research, and various other organizations have come. It doesn't mean that the other people, other lot who were outside the alliance suffered completely. No, it was not so. So Saha was able to go and create Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics in Calcutta. But he did not get the same kind of support and the money like Homi Bhabha got. Homi Bhabha also got money and support because he was from the family of Tatas. So he could easily mobilize a lot of money and very close to Nehru. So he could do that. So in the first phase, the policy for science is the period where it is just a policy for science. Nehru had this whole vision that once you modernize science and technology in the country, organize science and technology institutions, development will flow over a period of time. So you just fund the good universities, IITs, 5 IITs were created as a part of the Sarkar Committee report in 1948, which was based on the MIT model. And you will find a whole lot of science organization which has come about during the Nehruvian period was part of the A.V. Hill report, which accepted that most of these institutions which were created and brought within the government, and most of the heads of these institutions were made the secretaries to the government of India. So they were directly in contact with Nehru. It was acceptable to the politics. So the politics and science was so close and the development flowed into the whole thing. Till 1973, till the oil crisis, it was, you will find a new phase coming into the being of science for policy. You see, the first atomic energy blast, Pokhran, 1975, Aryabhatta, 80, Rohini. We were putting up our satellites from our own soil. So the whole science developments were responding to the political expectations. So that is how in science for policy. This was not the situation culture during the before that period, which is policy for science, which was purely a Nehruvian sort of an ideal and a vision that if you develop modern science and technology and create institutions, the development flows. Remember that period, even Gandhi was there. We will come to that picture in the other chapter. So later on, you will find that 1991 economic reforms have come during Dr. Manmohan Singh's government. After 1914, the present regime, which has come into being, where science and development, a lot of Clean India and Smart India and many of the projects which were there, where you will find a lot of stuff in the book. The big transformation comes out recently, about 3 or 4 years back, in terms of the mission orientation in science and innovation. This is basically the space research model and atomic energy model, where it was very successful in terms of the missions. If you look space research, if you look atomic energy, they are the big missions. So the same concept and same organizational model the government is trying to introduce into the whole mission orientation in science. Now you have quantum mission, you have AI mission, you have semiconductor mission. So these are missions in terms of the whole. There is a big goal is there, whether it is semiconductors, whether it is AI or something like that. Just like the space research had that we have to send this land upon the moon, that was a big machine or something like that. So it there, the chapter 5 deals with that. The chapter 6 is Gandhi and subaltern science, the rise of the appropriate technology and the inclusive innovation in contemporary India. So this is the kind of so when Nehru, the whole Nehruvian vision and the other things you will find, which is this thing, we have seen 2 models of science developed, science organization, A.V. Hill model and the M.N. Saha Scientific Research Council model. But when you come to Gandhi, this is the application of science and technology to development. This is the kind of a different model in terms of the whole thing. Gandhi was not anti-science. He was not anti-technology. What he was only saying is, villages perish, India will perish too. Because in 1950s, 67% of Indians were dependent on agriculture. And interestingly, even till today, 65% of Indians are dependent on agriculture. So Gandhi is still relevant. So why Gandhi started appropriate technology? Why Gandhi started small technology? Because Schumacher is invited in Small is Beautiful in 1960s. So you will find Gandhi and subaltern science, appropriate technology, the whole chapter on this. Gandhi was not alone. Of course, Nehru was a top-down model. SMT-based heavy industrialization. He thought that over a period of time, there will be a trickle-down theory, like economists talk about trickle-down theory, with the kind of the fruits of the development will flow into the whole society. It did not happen. So Gandhi, on the other hand, said that industrialization has been so planned to destroy the villages and the village crafts. In the state of the future, it will be subserve the villages and their trades. So it is not against industrialization, but it is against the technology, against industrialization, which alienates people, which alienates labor, where we are coming into the same situation with the AI and the jobs now. You see? So in terms of the economic philosophy and the discourse, you will find Gandhi's so many quotes are there. I will not go into the whole detail. He visits even the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, to understand what scientists are doing. He talked about there's a Gandhian plan. Gandhi was not alone. There were people. There were people like Kumarappa. There were people like Nachane. There was the whole lot of other people, Kriplani. So there's a whole lot of intellectuals were there. And J.C. Kumarappa, Why the Village Movement, A Play for Village-Centered Economic Order is one of the basic books. He's an economist. Kumarappa was a trained from Ivy League, one of the US universities in economics, who comes back, who joins Gandhi, and who talks about the whole rural development, who talks about decentralization, you see, and who says that we need to look into the small technologies, the technologies which could be managed by the this thing. So when Schumacher is invited by the Planning Commission in the 60s and the 70s, they create the whole concept of intermediate technology and appropriate technology comes into the whole policy discourse. So there's a whole chapter which gives about the origin of the Gandhi. There's a whole lot of Gandhian institutions are there. Even now, the KVIC is there, Khadi and Village Industries Commission. There's a whole lot of institutions which are there. There's a Gandhi Institute of Rural Industrialization, which was there in Varda. So a whole lot of people were involved in it, from Raman to Bose to Birla. KVI, Kumarappa Institute for Rural Technologies was also there at that particular point of time. There's a whole lot of people which was there in 1970s. Even the Karimnagar project was adopted by CSIR. IITs adopted villages, you know. So this was a kind of a Gandhian impact on the whole thing. We have to do something for the villages. We have to do something for the society where these institutions are there, the small technologies, because the big technologies and the big science is not directly relevant to the needs and this thing of the underprivileged sections. So there has to be a kind of science. So the whole lot of you will find the reinvention of Gandhi in terms of the inclusive innovation, which we are talking now in the 1990s. There's a whole lot of this thing. These are the institutions which were basically inspired by Gandhi. Amul Milk. If Amul Milk is put on the stock exchange market, it will compete with Reliance. It is such a huge organization, profitable organization, cooperative organization, you see, which is India is the largest producer of milk in the world today, is because of Amul Milk, you see. So this is because of the Patels and the Korean in Gujarat. Seva, Ela Bhatt, Self-Employed Women's Association. She used to pick women from the streets who are poor and who was trained in terms of food processes, you see, chapatis and papad and many of those things were made, and there were thousands and thousands of women were trained. Barefoot College, Bankar Roy in Tilonia, you will find he was another inspired Gandhian who himself is an engineer who created what is known as solar engineers. You see, barefoot solar engineers. In 1980s till 1990s in Kargil and Ladakh, when the grid electricity wouldn't go there. So it is the Barefoot College which has created the solar energy devices in early 80s, you know, and those people were trained at the Barefoot College in Kelonia. So they have this concept, the Gandhian concept, that common sense is enough to convert and into do some kind of a technological activity, learning by doing, learning by interaction kind of concepts. So Barefoot National Innovation Foundation, you all know Anil Gupta is there, CSIR and Department of Science and Technology has put in nearly $100 million into it, who created a new innovation model, new intellectual property model, that the rents generated from the commercialization of the intellectual property will go back to the community, you see. So that is the first concept. Even OECD has taken it over because Mashelkar, who was connected with OECD, has introduced this whole concept of common intellectual property, how it's seen and all. Jaipur Foot is there. Jaipur Foot is another kind of inclusive Gandhian-inspired institution. Millions of artificial foot were given to Afghanistan and various other places. Arvind Eye Care, again, they did thousands of eye surgeries at 50 rupees in Chennai, Madras. Solar projects are there. So this is the kind of Gandhian inspired chapter, which is basically dealing with small technology, inclusive innovation as a kind of subaltern science, which is a kind of a peripheral, which is an neglected one. These are very, very successful models, and one wonders why the small industries policy of the government has paid only very little attention to many of these kind of institutions. One doesn't know. If you look each of them, very, very successful ones. If you see even Amul now, the kind of the products, my God, the products they have introduced into the market is mind-boggling, you see. The chapter 7 deals with science activism in India, people's and alternative science movements. As I told you, the title Indian science community is a larger, broader one to capture various facets of science, technology, society relationship in the country. So that is the reason why I have given. So the 7th chapter talks on science activism in India, people's and alternative science movements. In 1970s, 1973 is again a period of oil crisis, just like now it is happening. And 1970s is also the period where the whole green revolution has begun. 1970s is also the period where the whole Nehruvian model was heavily criticized because there was a whole lot of crisis in terms of energy and whole lot of realization that the underprivileged sections of the people, the science and technology has not reached the poor people in the country. So you will find the lot of criticisms is there's a JP movement at that particular point of time. There's a change in the government of the Janata regime coming into the whole being. In 1980s, the Bhopal gas tragedy happens, which is another example of how multinationals have plundered some of the third world countries. And this thing, there's a whole realization of the failure of the trickle-down theory, which was sort of envisioned during the Nehruvian period. The rise of the environmental movement in India. Again, environmental movement in India is not, again, a copycat of the Western environmental movement. You see, the roots of it can go back to Kumarappa, where Ramchandra Guha calls him Green Gandhi. You see, there are people like the Chipko movement, which is there, Sundarlal Baguna and Pathak, who's there. The whole lot of, it is not that the Western influence which is there. Even there were people, the anti-science movement, people were there like Vandana Shiva and various other people. So the emergence of science movement, there were the people's science movement and the alternative science movement is there. The people's science movement is basically a left-oriented kind of movement. There were a number of organizations which were there. We will look into many of those organizations who said that the modern science is a progressive one. Scientific temper is very important. So you have to relate science to development. The only problem is the science is appropriated by the multinationals or the imperialistic forces. Once you relieve science from these imperialistic forces, the development will flow to the people. That is the kind of the vision basically given by Joseph Needham, J.D. Bernal, many of those left-oriented scientists, the British-oriented scientists at that particular point of time. So it was a Marxist, left-oriented kind of a this thing. There were people like Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, which is more than 80,000 science teachers were involved in those movement. Eklavya group was there. There's a whole lot of very important work they did. You will find that there was the alternative science movement. And in the alternative science movement, they were Gandhians, they were environmentalists, they were anti-science people, Ashish Nandi, basically, Vandana Shiva. There were movements. So the alternative science movement, the larger groups had a lot of these people. You will find in the chapter many of these this thing. So the critique, so the alternative science movement, too much of hegemony of modern science, the only way of thinking, well, that's what Vandana Shiva says. Hegemony is a masculine and the domination is inherent in the science institution. So this is the kind of a perspective they had. They had KSSP, Eklavya Group, All India People Science Network at 26 bodies. Astra was another group in IISc Bangalore, AK and Reddy, who did a lot of research work on energy, the small energy, how alternative energy could be done. The Delhi Science Forum was there, the Bharat Jan Vigyan Jatta, Center for Science and Environment, where you have now. It was basically originated from Anil Agarwal. And now they are doing very fantastic work. The first environment report comes out from Center for Science and Environment. There were groups in IITs and the IIMs, So this was the People Science Movement. They call it Alternative Science Movements, Center for Developing Societies, where Ashish Nandi was there. They projected a kind of an anti-science. They said the modern Western science is violence to the society. So we need to go back to the non-Western Indian traditions, which was an extreme position, which was not very acceptable to larger intellectual culture or the kind of this thing. It reigned for a moment, but it died down. Chipko movement was there, another Gandhian-inspired Lok Swastha Parampara Samvardhana Samiti, which is their local people health traditions. This was quite an important movement. If you look in India, more than 70% of the childbirth even today is done by midwives, not in the modern hospitals. So that is the reason why you will find these kind of institutions are very, very important. And you have Gene Campaign, Farmers Association. So in this particular chapter 7, you will find that what is the role of people science movement? Why did they come up? What kind of a role they played? How they were linked to the development? You see, why did they fail? So somebody should take up a research paper or a research kind of this thing to do that. Why, what was good and what was bad in some of these people science movement, which were very important, which were not small movements, they were huge movements. You see, went on for a long time. They have taken other forms now, and this is the kind of the research till about I think 2005 or 2006. We will find. The chapter 8 is the mediating role of scientific elite, science and politics in society. I told you there were a lot of stuff of science and politics, whether it was between C.V. Raman and M.M. Saha, or alliance between science and politics between Nehru and scientists. So this chapter deals with the whole concept of scientific elite. Who are scientific elite? Are they part of the scientific community? Is the scientific elite is the part of the government? If they're part of the government, what they are doing? See, it's very important because if you look, people like N.G.K. Menon, who was one of the leading scientists at that particular point of time, there was the whole struggle based by KSSP, Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, the Silent Valley Dam project. If you Google, you will get Silent Valley Dam project, where they wanted to sort of demolish the whole rainforest and create dams there. But it's a huge movement which was led for a long time, and they fought and they were successful. M.G.K. Menon was the head of this thing. Indira Gandhi at that particular point. They have yielded to the whole this. So there's a whole scientific elite playing a role. So in this chapter, what I do is that I try to pick about 30 to 35 scientific elite in the post-independence period and try to see what kind of a role they play in terms of the whole science and development. So there's a whole story about M.S. Swaminathan, who is known as the father of agriculture and who created the whole thing. There's the other stories which are there. You can sort of look into the whole thing. There's so the whole mediating role of the scientific elite is also one of the issues we try to look into it. That when do scientists come to the elite positions? How do they come about? Is it just because they are heads of the Indian National Science Academies or of the Science Advisory Committee, or how do they come into the being? You see, how do then once they come into the scientific elite, they become important people in the government. So when they become important people in the government, so what do they do for the science? Are they part of the science community or they are part of the government? You see, well, how do they sort of the two policies? So, for instance, the environment. Environment is a huge issue, pollution issue. Is Indian National Science Academy doing anything about it? Or do they raise any kind of the questions? They give a scientific kind of a this thing to the government. So some of these kind of the perspective where one tries to raise in this chapter, then try to show that how do they estimate their position once they come to the scientific elite level, the leadership level, they become part of the government. How do they estimate their legitimization position? Is it because their access to the political power or to the contribution of the science? You see, so that is I do that and I just leave it for the other people to further take it up, take the case studies or whatever it is. But it is important to study the role of the scientific elite because they are very important. They are very important not only to the bureaucracy and to the scientific community, but the development. The chapter 9 is the social organization of science, Indian research landscape. Actually, when I was part of CSIR and the NIStats, and earlier I was at the CSIR and the NIStats, one of the large projects we did was on ICSO group. This is the International Comparative Study on the Science Policy Research Units. These are UNESCO funded projects. We selected something like more than 700 research groups in CSIR labs and other labs in the country. And some 6 or 7 of us were involved in that. And we visited almost every lab and discussed with the scientists, with their questionnaire, because it was a UNESCO project. Some of the people from UNESCO were also involved with it. That was to understand what is the research culture within the labs. You see, how hierarchy is played out within the labs. What is the reward system? Is there a kind of a reward system which is responding to the merit, or is it only the reward system which is over a period of time that you scale up into the whole position? There's a whole lot of issues were there. They were in this chapter. You will find the issues of brain gain, which are there. There's a whole lot of issues we discussed in this particular chapter, and shed light on the sociological dynamics and the complexity that shape the scientific landscape in India. So there were the whole lot of scholars have written, whether it is Robert K. Merton, Thomas Kuhn, who wrote this fantastic book on structure of scientific revolutions. Everyone should read. Jerome Ravetz or J.D. Bernal. Many of these people have written. So we use whether to what extent it reflects the kind of the social situation in the Indian labs. Unfortunately, we were not able to get to. There are some references to the gender and science, but given certain my own limitations, we could not deal very much with some of those kind of the topics. So this social organization of science, it gives the different contours of Indian research labs in terms of the whole thing. The 10th chapter is on the universities in India Science and Innovation System. I did 2 books about 4 or 5 years back, Universities and National Innovation Systems. This has had about 13 country case studies, including Indian this thing. If you look in universities and India, there are 3 academic revolutions has taken place. The first academic revolution, if you look into the Western higher education history, they say it is the Cambridge and Oxford, which is not true. It is the Nalanda and Takshila, ancient universities where that is the first academic revolution where teaching was institutionalized formally. There were students, they were institutions, and there was the kind of a structure, academic structure which was there. But it is not Cambridge and Oxford which has given to us. We got it from the Nalanda and Takshila, and the world has also learned from it. It was an international institution. There were 2,000 teachers and 20,000 students came from different. So that is the first academic revolution. It gives the kind of a critique again to the history of the Western education and the kind of the perspective which people give about. They tell us that it is the Oxbridge is the sort of a thing which from where everything has been come, which is only 50% true. The second academic revolution happened when the teaching and research was combined. Of course, that was Humboldtian model for the Berlin University, where for the first time the teaching and the research was combined. The third academic revolution is the combining teaching, research, and innovation. The concept of innovation was come. The German universities linked to three firms, the Bayer, Hoechst, and the Bas. Actually, the first PhDs in America also went from Germany, because Germany, the late 19th century, was one of the world leaders in terms of the whole this thing. So it gives this kind of a perspective of three academic revolutions. Of course, in India, I told you PCA and SS Bhatnagar, they also did a lot of university industry. India was not far behind, but much of those important examples you will get from the Chinese this thing. The other important thing which I did in this chapter, if you look in science publications, you see, more than 70 to 80% of the publications, right from 30, 40 years, are from the universities. You see, more than 70%. But what kind of money they get? Only 4%. This is the DST R&D statistics, 4 or 5% of the total money. So the 70% of the publications which are accounted by the universities are again done by 15% of the universities. There are more than 1,300 universities in this country. Only 15% or 12% of the universities produce those 70% of the publication. So the rest of the universities are just the teaching institutions. So still there's an Humboldtian goal we have to achieve, where the teaching and research is combined, you see. So that's one of the issues which we raise in this particular chapter. There's a whole database of the science technology from our journal, which we have said, which we publish, and various other things are there. There are other interesting things on the whole universities chapter, which I wouldn't go into detail because of the lack of time. The 11th chapter is the changing social contract between science and society, contemporary challenges. This is the last chapter. And you will find that if you look into the whole history of the modern science, right from Francis Bacon's The Knowledge is Power, the Karl Popper, who wrote a fantastic book on the open society and its enemies in 1940. Robert Merton wrote a book on the 1942. His whole ethos of science was based on the research he did on the Royal Society and how science developed. You will find a fantastic book, another Republic of Science by the Michael Polanyi, who talked about science as autonomous, complex, and things like that. So when you find that because of the contributions of people like this, and because of the kind of the science culture we developed over the last 300 or 400 years, you had a social contract. So what was the social contract? The science was part of the culture. Advancing knowledge was for primary motive. Open science and peer evaluation is the kind of the most important thing. Academic science, which is the pure science, is very important. The public conducive for the advancing of knowledge, the public good. So the governments have to fund research for the public good. You see, whether it is profitable or not, doesn't matter. They are for them. So these were the kind of the existing social contract, and these were the things which came out for the last 300 or 400 years, which was there. Everybody accepted. What happened during the 1990s? There's a whole globalization of economic globalization, and the science globalization has come about. So science is a part of the culture, but science is becoming a part of the commerce and the market. So in this chapter, what I do is that I am not taking a pro or anti kind of a view. I am only stating the kind of the change which has come about in the society in terms of the science and society. So it's for the people to better understand it. So from advancing knowledge, it is generating wealth and profits more important. It has become. Open science and peer evaluation, secrecy and intellectual property rights is the thing. You see now. You will find academic science now. You're talking about entrepreneurs, universities. So from peer evaluation, you will find regulated by stakeholders. So even in MIT, the Whitehead Institute of Biological Sciences, even before the biological research is done, they enter into the patent agreements. You see, so it is the regulation by the stakeholders. Is not just the MIT, but most of the Ivy League universities. Much of the modern and the front-ranking biology, this thing. You will be surprised that there are two bulletins issued in the morning and in the afternoon in terms of the whole modern biology, where so that is the kind of the competition which is going on, which is regulated by the stakeholders who put in a lot of money. The IPR institutionalization about progress of knowledge, but you can't help it. That is what is intellectual property rights is doing. So what? So in this particular chapter, what I do in the chapter 11 is the changing social contract between science and society. So what should we do? So how do the question is not completely give up this one, except that one. The whole issue is we have to balance it. You see, basic research, fundamental research is also important. At the same time, science to development and commercialization is also. So the whole policy issue and the policy debate is how do you balance? That is the main thing. So I think I will stop here and take any questions or whatever this is.
We can take some questions now.
It depends from case to case. You see, uh, in this particular chapter, what we have done is we have taken some cases. We have chosen people like Swaminathan, M.J.K. Menon, Varadarajan, who's there, and we've also tried to see, say, in the 1980s, one of the largest disasters of Bhopal gas tragedy has happened, where thousands of people died. What did Indian National Science Academy do? What did Indian Academy of Science do? What did the elite say about it? You see, so looking into those case studies, you have to take a case study and then try to see it and how they respond to it. If they're not responding, then you have to do research why they're not responding. There's a crisis in the society, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. See, so if there are crises in the society, whether it is environmental pollution or whether it is waste utilization or whether it is cleaning up the Ganga, or there are so many other crises are there, and a lot of public money has gone into it, you see. So this particular chapter, it doesn't take sides. So what it tries to raise a question and a perspective, showing to researchers that this is an area where you can do if you like to do research. You see, beyond that, I can't. I can't take that. That was not the purpose of the book. Actually, the purpose of the book was to lay down a certain perspective where people could use it. Yeah.
was here in the stats working on history of science, so it has been refreshing also hear that. Thank you for that. Plus, of course, when you were going through that history, I was about to ask uh, on the gender issue. On you already pointed out that you haven't worked in that area, but it would be really interesting to know. Although we know that only now it has become a topic of research and more focus is given on the gender equality now. But still, I think a lot of women must have worked not in the top, but at least giving some, I should say, support to in whatever way, being into directly into science or as a support, so that science could progress and history could be written.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, Dr. Neelam Kumar, who's from here only, she worked a lot on gender and science. And there are other people who worked in the gender and science. Uh, the two or three issues are there. One is that India is a patriarchal society, male-dominated society. And these kind of patriarchal society and the norms are transposed also in the labs. You see, to what extent it is done is again a agenda for research. You see, and the other issue is if you compare international comparative with other developed countries, India is not backward. The women participation into science and technology is quite substantial. I have not looked into the details. I don't remember the kind of the statistics, but India is not far behind. Is not behind the developed countries. Which is a kind of a very important factor. And they've definitely played a very dominant role, whether in many of our organizations also. So there is a very good area if somebody wants to look into it.
Next project, now that you have shown interest, I think that is something which you should do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we began our career listening to all this using kind of nostalgia, but it used to be in those days.
Yeah, yeah.
Really deep actually, and the kind of rigor brought in. It so many research projects can be taken from your top. What two or three things I would like to highlight. The elitist approach which you highlighted in the beginning of independence, the setting up of institutions. I think in that, I think the defense or nuclear atomic took them center stage rather than socio-economic or medical or healthcare. This sector of left. And then the realization period came in early 70s, the expectation period came. And then that inclusive approach gained momentum. But still, I think that elitist approach gave India the kind of advantage which still India can have in terms of strategy, defense, nuclear, atomic. That strategic advantage which India is currently, having.
Yeah.
That is the outcome of that elitist approach.
Absolutely.
And the bottom-up approach, which gained center stage, the neglected, Gandhi couldn't dominate it, couldn't put it forward, never dominated. So that is important still to take inclusive. It is definitely a major part of society has to get the benefit of efforts. I think the both approach are important.
Yeah. Absolutely nothing to take away from it. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. You see, in 1940s, you should also remember that India had a long struggle with the British to gain independence, and there was partition, and the whole partition also led to a lot of crisis. You see, and the partition and the crisis and the kind of the situation we were in, and imagine in that particular situation, the political leadership has planned almost 80% of the organizations which are existing today. You go back to it, they are existing then. whether it is defense, whether it is space, whether it is atomic energy, whether it is, so there were struggles there, which is there. Unfortunately, Gandhi departed in 1948, you see. So Gandhians were there. But those Gandhians couldn't stand up to Nehruvian. See, so yeah, so even during Nehru and Gandhi did not agree on many of the issues. But when the question of independence came, Gandhi said Nehru will be because he knew that he had a modern vision, you see. So for a number of reasons, there are other kind of things are there. But Nehru also has given certain respect to Gandhian vision, but not to the extent money was not there. Money was limited, whether you give it to Homi Baba and Tata's in terms of the atomic energy and space research and CSIR building each labs, because he also had this vision that once you develop science, once the modern science and technology and in development will flow over a period of time.
It's a Russian model.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly.
That technology development, the leading of science to technology was more in US and Europe than to India, maybe. And that's why, because of this technological leading of science to technology, give them the control over the world. And by Indian science leading to philosophy, more association of philosophy and science rather than science.
But iron pillar is technology. It's not that India was lacking in technology, right? If you look at the
Intention, I think, was more.
yeah, that is.
It was the call of the time, like strategically planning into defense and atomic, because it was required at that particular time.
Yeah.
That's why we are reaping the benefit today.
Yeah.
They keep saying, thanks for the atomic energy.
Yes.
No, today we keep thinking that
Yes.
strategic
Yeah.
advantage.
See, Homi Baba could plan in biology also. You see, he brought in Obed Siddiqui from Caltech. You have the in Bangalore, one of the NCBS is there, which created by Obed Siddiqui. So that was planned in 1950s. Yeah. I know that.
Following in Uganda to reduce the cost, not in the forefront of the technology, but in the method as well.
Very important question. And even before coming here, we were very briefly discussing if we compare with China. And the thing is, India has fallen back. In 1991, if you measure through the science publications, I was telling the director that in mid 90s, India published 10,000 science publications measured in SCI. China did only 6,000. So we were much higher. So in another 25, 30 years, China overtaken India by 3 times or even 4 times. Now it will be 5 times, you see. So India was at that time spending about 0.6 or percent or something like that. China was also spending 0.6% of GDP. But over a period of time, China today is spending 2.8% of GDP into R&D and science and technology. $650 billion. India is investing just $70 billion and we are still at 0.7% of GDP. You see, so it is good that, even the chief of ANRF came here, who gave, I was hearing through the online lecture.
To know that.
Yeah. Yeah. So he gave a fantastic blueprint of ANRF and all the debates which go back to CNR Rao, when the SERC in DST was created. But the thing is, government is giving about 11 to 12 billion dollars. That is the earmark of the budget for the ANRF. But government is giving only 20% of that one. 80% of that money, the chief of ANRF said that will come from the public-private investments. So we would have been much happier if the government has given 80% and 20% taken from the industry. You see, so that is also, we are doing reforms. The government is very active in terms of putting in money, opening up its this thing, saying that there is a Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is very, very important, and technological sovereignty has become a very big issue after Trump. So it has taken into this thing. But I hope in the coming days it will put more money into R&D and the S&T. But one good thing is that the private firms have come in a very big way now. Say the whole semiconductor 28 nano chip is coming out of Sanad factory in Gujarat in another few days, which will take care of 50% of India's needs. From 28 nano, we might come down to 15 nano. Where Taiwan is doing 2 nano, you see. So, so things are happening now, and luckily the government has opened up, and now mission orientation of science is there. So this is a larger question that money is not gone into the B. You see, well, the science communication is not just about knowledge or something, where the whole concept of scientific temper is there, which is we need to do it. There's now the new technologies are there. Digital revolution has come about. So there is a very big agenda there where you can use these kind of devices for the science communication, which is there. But at the end of the day, you see that you need to build up those institutions, intermediary institutions into the science in those regions, where it is not. So fundamentally, if you see the science teaching in the village schools or the non-urban schools, if you look in some school, they will, even the board will not be properly there. You see, so there are certain basic foundational issues which are already sort of we need to build up there. Secondly, if you see, like I mentioned about the people science movement, there was a whole lot of Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad is there, Eklavya group was there. There's a whole lot of professors were involved in the whole these things. How to take science in their own idiom and their own languages into the villages. In Madhya Pradesh, the Eklavya group was using Babulka Kanta for dissection. You see, so they had a different model. So there are issues are there. So the question is that why these models and why these things have not become very popular? What are the issues? Why they were aborted? Very important things were there. It's not that people did not think about it, or we are for the first time we are thinking. There are debates. If you dig deep into the history of the science communication, the kind of the work people science groups have done, marvelous work they have done. If you just take out the whole their left orientation and see in terms of mathematics, in terms of science experimentation, in terms of the science teaching, a lot of work they have done. Unfortunately, some of them have been aborted. Yeah, 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 yeah.
And mission of our scientific institutions, this whole discourse that have different things.
I was telling the director that people could do some research on the role and the impact of CSIR labs and things like that. You see, it's not that the CSIR has not done. There are again, if you look into, there's a whole tractor project which was there, Swaraj tractor project, Punjab. You see, in a area of green revolution, Swaraj tractor was the most successful project. If you can do that, why other labs can't do that? You see, Amul. Where is from where did Amul come? Yeah, fellow, it came from the CFTRI. You see, in India, 80% of the milk is buffalo based. You see, outside in Western countries, it is cow's milk. So the curd tension is very high, fat, very high fat content. So you take out the fat content and make the milk palatable to the infants. That was the kind of the technology where Glaxo was not interested in doing in 1950s. So it is the CFTRI which has done. When CFTRI did that, Nehru telephoned the Patels in Gujarat and said that there is a technology here. You see? So that is how later on Kurian also went. Kurian is a nuclear scientist, actually. You see, it is an accident Kurian went to Gujarat. So he took government money to study in US. When he comes back, he said, you have to work in villages for 6 months or 1 year. So he said, where should I go? He said, go to Gujarat. So he went to Gujarat and then he stayed there only till he, this thing. So then from a nuclear, he became a food scientist, you see. So, so again, Amul is another this thing. There are hundreds of other technologies are there, where again, I would say CSIR is not given enough money to do research. You see, now we were talking about defense and we were talking about, see, 0.7% of India's GDP, about something works out to be $70 billion. 55% of the money goes to three strategic sectors: space, atomic energy, and defense. The rest 45% is divided thinly into civilian R&D organizations. You see, now that is the problem. So you need to put in more money there. Okay. Secondly, CSIR has, see, if you take Uttar Pradesh, see many industrial clusters. 3 of my students worked on industrial clusters in Muradabad and other places. Aligarh, Meerut. You see, these are the industrial clusters where contributing 18% of India's GDP. You see, and if you take these clusters, they're fantastic cluster. They did fantastic work in globalization. After the globalization, they're coming down. You take Aligarh, locks. You see, any one of us have bought Aligarh locks, 7 levers lock, but now it is Godrej or information locks are coming. Every year, 4 to 5% of the locks are closing down, the firms. If Aligarh University's engineering department and the information technology department is nothing to do with the Aligarh locks, then God save the country. You see, in Meerut, where my wife was a professor in sociology for 30 years in the Meerut University. So I have a very close knowledge about Meerut. You see, 35 colleges are there, 4 or 5 universities are there. India's one of the largest printing industries located there. The sports goods industry is located there. In none of the 35 colleges, neither a journalism department is there, nor a sports good training is there. You see. So the neighborhood impact is very important for research institutions. You see, if you tell IIT scientist or JNU scientist or a CSIR scientist go to village and do something, they will not do. We should accept a criticism that science is ivory tower research. So what we need to do is to build intermediary institutions. Intermediary institutions where you take the research from the formal institutions, see the needs and development of those, and transfer who can transfer the institutions. Except that, these are elite scientists and they will not go to villages and work. They will work in the labs in the cities in this thing. You see, so you need to build intermediary institutions. Now, what are the intermediary institutions where you can build and where you can do? So, for instance, CSIR has in Kurja, they had a ceramic research association. Is still there.
Center.
So, but CSIR doesn't have in Muradabad. So you need to build technological supporting centers which are there.
That's what we had exactly to do that in Ludhiana. See, yeah,
Ah.
Ludhiana, where there is Mary
Yeah.
mechanical.
Yeah, you need more institutions on that.
Pantnagar
Yeah.
it
So
was meant for that kind of connect.
yeah.
Local.
So, so these are the things where I think where CSR will play a major role in small scale industries and this thing, because that is the backbone of India in terms of the whole economy, you see. So, I think there are so many other things we can discuss. Yeah.
They are taking care of the whole footwear technology,
Mm.
and no nearby government college or government institution is taking care of that.
Yeah.
They are taking care.
Central Leather Research Institute in Madras. CLRI has done a lot of work.
It's going down. But CSIR worked in
Complete disconnected with
IIT
I think
Kanpur.
it was complete.
IIT
like
Kanpur.
you right,
Yeah.
mentioned, complete disconnected with the local problem, pollution.
But CLRI was working. CLRI had worked in Kanpur for the revival of the tannery.
No, somewhere in the
Yeah.
book, I talk about neighborhood impact of research institutions. So where yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
think fascinating talk, and I
Yeah.
think based on the questions, it's very, very. So I think only one thing I was thinking, journalist she pointed out, and a lot of people like Anna Mani and Vibha
Many scientists are there.
Chatterjee. So it's not like many women scientists have contributed even in those early years actually. And you didn't develop on much about the industry part, because when you were talking of the science and technology,
Yeah.
because industry also, that will
Yeah.
certain industries, especially the chemicals, the generic drugs.
Yeah.
India played a very critical role,
Yeah.
and especially CSIR.
Yeah.
Like CSIR labs,
Yeah.
they work for the
Yeah.
generic drugs.
Yeah.
That I think
No,
was
Today,
something,
if India is the backbone of generic drugs, is because of CSIR. Again, you were asking that 5 or 6 labs which were there working on the reverse engineering. The 1971 Patent Act was very important. 1971 Patent Act has given protection to the patents for 7 years. So after 7 years, what they open up the patents and do reverse engineering and put a generic drug into the market. Now we have got into 20 years patents. So you can't. So only after 20 years you can. Even now they are doing it.
the trips.
Yeah. So whether it is Toxicological Research Institute, IACT, Hyderabad, or NCL, Pune, they have done fantastic work, and many of these people, Dr. Reddy Labs, and many of the the UDCT Bombay was there, where many of Indian the CSR directors came from UDCT Bombay. UDCT Bombay had a very big role in terms of the chemical industry. In terms of the drugs, again, a problem is that you see about 7 or 8, 10 years back, they said that Indian drugs, 70% of the APIs are coming from China. You see, so they said it is Ajit Doval gave a public statement saying that it is a national security issue. You see,
During COVID, actually,
10 years back.
Supply chain was a major issue.
10 years back, Ajit Doval said it is a national security issue, which was real. It is a national security issue. If China completely this thing, your drug industry will will stop. Even till today, we are dependent on 70% of APIs. You see, so CSR has a big role in that. If you have to, having given the foundation for this thing, so if it comes down to 40% from 70%, it's a very big thing for a country like India, where not only 1.4 billion people, but almost the entire South Asia is dependent on Indian drugs and pharmaceutical Africa. You see, the cancer and the HIV drugs are the most cheapest but the APIs have to come from China. You see, so there is a fundamental strategic issue that we have to work on. So these are the certain things.
Thank you,
One
sir.
last question I had. You mentioned at the beginning, you mentioned there was this two models, A.B. Hill model and Meghnad Sahab model.
Yeah.
What if Meghnad Sahab model had taken up, what you would have seen the difference?
We would have seen that today the universities
Yeah, this is what.
flourishing. Universities would have been flourishing with research intensity. You see, why China today, out of 10, 8 out of 10 top 100 universities or this thing are from China now. They have overtaken Cambridge, they have overtaken Oxford, the Ivy League universities. Why? Because they have heavily funded. We did a book on Chinese universities in the National Innovation System. From mid-90s, they had Project 221985 C11 is a huge, something like 15 to 20 billion dollars they have put into the 30 or 40 universities. They said, now this is the money, you win the race for us. You see, so we were discussing about authoritarian regime and things like that. 4 times I went to China. I was a visiting professor at the Tsinghua University. And you will find that in many of those universities, 90% freedom is given. Most of the professors are party members. There is no doubt about that one. But as far as the university and day-to-day functioning is going on, full freedom. There is no the political leadership only says we want this. We want, say, something like in the coming 10 to 15 years, at least 10 Chinese universities should be in the top 100. So they will give 12. That's what happened now. Almost about 12 Chinese universities are on the top 100. So our IITs in the come in 350, you see, list. So universities are very, very crucial, important in terms of the whole thing.
Thank you, sir, for a very informative and inspiring talk. Your insights have certainly sparked a nice conversation around the history of science again. So I now request Dr. Geeta Vani Rayasan to kindly felicitate Professor Krishna with a shawl and a Madhubani painting as a token of our appreciation.
Very insightful.
Wow, beautiful. Wonderful. Thanks.
We are truly grateful for the enriching insights shared today. So on behalf of CSIR-NISpR, I thank our speaker, our director, and all of you for joining us. Thank you.